The orange glow on the horizon looked like a sunset, but it was only 3 in the afternoon, and Helena Graham knew with a sinking certainty that the flames devouring her homestead meant everything she had built in the last 2 years was gone. She stood in the creek bed where she had been washing clothes, water dripping from her hands, watching thick black smoke spiral into the clear September sky over Colfax, California in 1882. Her legs wanted to run toward the cabin, but her mind understood the futility. The raiders had struck fast and brutal, just as they had done to the Morrison place last month and the Chen farm before that. She could hear their horses thundering away, their whoops and hollers fading into the distance, leaving only destruction in their wake. Helena forced herself to move, climbing up the embankment with her skirts clutched in trembling fists. The cabin her late husband had built before he died of fever was fully engulfed, the roof already beginning to collapse inward. The barn was burning too, but at least her mare had been out grazing and had run off at the sound of the commotion. Everything else was gone. The furniture Jacob had crafted, the quilts her mother had sent from Missouri, the seedlings she had been nurturing for next spring's planting, the modest savings she had hidden in a tin under the floorboards. All of it was being consumed by hungry flames that seemed to mock her with their crackling laughter. She stood there until the sun actually did begin to set, until the fires had burned themselves down to glowing embers and ash. Her neighbors were too far scattered to have seen the smoke in time to help, and she was grateful for that at least. She did not want anyone to see her like this, hollow and defeated, covered in soot and tears. When full darkness came, she wrapped herself in the damp shirt she had been washing and curled up against a boulder near the creek, too exhausted and shocked to feel the cold. Morning brought the sound of hoofbeats, and Helena jerked awake, her heart hammering with fear that the raiders had returned. But it was a single rider, and as he drew closer, she recognized him as one of the cowboys from the large cattle operation that bordered her property to the north. She had seen him a few times at the general store in town, always polite but quiet, with observant dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and a leather vest over a faded blue shirt. "Madam," he said, dismounting before he reached her, leading his horse the last few yards on foot, as if he understood that a man on horseback might seem threatening to a woman who had just lost everything. "I am Franklin Edwards. I was riding the boundary line and saw the smoke yesterday. Came as fast as I could, but I was on the far side of the range." Helena pushed herself to standing, suddenly aware of how she must look, her dark hair tangled and full of ash, her dress torn and filthy. "Helena Graham," she managed, her voice rough from smoke and crying. "They are gone. The raiders. They took everything." Franklin's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes, though his voice remained gentle. "I am sorry. This has been happening too much lately. The law has not been able to catch them." He glanced at the smoldering ruins of her home, then back at her. "Do you have family nearby? Somewhere you can go?" She shook her head. "No one. My husband died 8 months ago. We came out here from Missouri, but everyone I knew is back there. I used what little money we had left to keep the place going through the summer." Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. She had cried enough. "I suppose I will have to find work in town, try to save enough for passage back east." Franklin was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, "The ranch where I work, they need help at the main house. Cooking, cleaning, mending. The owner's wife passed last winter, and he has been struggling to keep up with the household while running cattle. It would be room and board plus wages. Not much, but honest work." Helena looked at him, trying to read his intentions, but his face showed only sincere concern. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one should have to face this alone." He gestured toward the ruins. "I can take you to the ranch, introduce you to Mr. Patterson. What you decide after that is your choice, but at least you would have a roof over your head tonight." She wanted to refuse out of pride, but pride would not fill her stomach or keep her warm when the autumn nights grew colder. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Franklin," he corrected gently, "and we should see if your horse came back. She might be nearby." They found the mare grazing in a meadow about a mile away, skittish but unharmed. Franklin helped Helena catch her, his movements calm and patient, and then they rode together toward the Patterson ranch, Helena on her mare and Franklin on his sturdy gelding. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house, several barns, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle dotted the rolling hills in every direction, and despite her situation, Helena could appreciate the beauty of the landscape, golden grass rippling in the breeze beneath a brilliant blue sky. Mr. Patterson was a weathered man, in his 60s with a thick gray beard and kind eyes that had seen their share of hardship. He listened to Franklin's explanation, studied Helena for a long moment, then nodded. "My wife Martha would have insisted I help, so I suppose I have no choice," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. "We have a small room off the kitchen. It is not much, but it is clean. You can start tomorrow if you are up to it. Today, rest and get yourself cleaned up. Franklin, show her where everything is." Franklin led her to the main house, carrying her single salvage possession, the damp shirt that now seemed a pitiful reminder of all she had lost. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained. But it had a window that looked out over the hills, and the bed had clean sheets and a thick quilt. Helena nearly wept again at the simple comfort of it. "There is a bathing room down the hall," Franklin told her. "I will get some hot water going for you. Mrs. Patterson's clothes are still in the chest in the master bedroom. Mr. Patterson has not been able to bring himself to go through them. I am sure he would not mind if you borrowed something until you can get to town for your own things." He left her alone, and Helena sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. An hour later, clean and dressed in a borrowed calico dress that was only slightly too large, she made her way to the kitchen. Franklin was there, stirring a pot of stew that smelled like heaven. He glanced up when she entered, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. "You should eat," he said. "You must be starving." She was, and the stew was simple but delicious, thick with beef and vegetables. They ate in companionable silence at the kitchen table, and Helena found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, not much older than her own 24 years. He had strong, capable hands scarred from hard work, and a face that was more interesting than handsome, with a straight nose and a firm mouth that looked like it did not smile often but should. "How long have you worked here?" she asked, breaking the silence. 5 years. I came west from Texas after my father died. Needed a fresh start." He met her eyes. "I know something about losing everything and having to begin again." "Does it get easier?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Franklin considered this seriously. "Yes and no. The grief does not go away, but you learn to carry it better. And you find new things to care about, new reasons to keep going." He stood, collecting their empty bowls. "You should rest more. Tomorrow will be a full day." But Helena could not rest. She spent the afternoon exploring the kitchen, taking inventory of supplies, planning meals in her head. It gave her something to focus on besides the aching loss. When Franklin came in at sunset, dusty and tired from a day of ranch work, she had biscuits baking in the oven and coffee brewing. "You did not have to start working today," he said, but he looked pleased. "I needed to do something useful," she admitted. "Sitting alone with my thoughts is dangerous right now." He understood. She could see it in his eyes, that recognition of shared pain. "Then tomorrow I will show you the root cellar and the smokehouse, so you know what we have put up for winter. And I will take you into town when you are ready, so you can get some proper clothes and anything else you need. Mr. Patterson will advance you some wages." "I do not want charity," Helena said quickly. "It is not charity. It is an advance on work you will do. There is a difference." Franklin poured himself coffee, cradling the tin cup in both hands. "You strike me as someone who pays her debts." She relaxed slightly. "I do. Then we have an understanding." That night, Helena lay in her narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind whispering through the eaves, the creak of the old house settling, and outside her window she heard the quiet footsteps of someone walking the perimeter of the house. She got up and peered through the curtain to see Franklin making a slow circuit of the main house, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He was standing guard. The realization brought tears to her eyes again. But this time, they were not entirely from grief. When had anyone last cared enough about her safety to lose sleep over it? Not since her father had died when she was 16. Her husband Jacob had been a good man, but practical to a fault, and it had never occurred to him that she might need protection from anything more than the ordinary dangers of ranch life. She watched until Franklin completed his circuit and disappeared around the corner of the house, then returned to bed. For the first time since the fire, she felt something other than despair. It was too fragile to call hope, but it was at least the possibility of hope, and that was enough for now. The days developed a rhythm. Helena woke before dawn to start breakfast for Mr. Patterson and the ranch hands. Franklin always appeared in the kitchen first, offering to help, though she shooed him away, insisting that he had his own work to do. But he would linger over his coffee, and they would talk about small things, the weather, the cattle, the latest news from town. She learned that he could read and write, unusual for a cowboy, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh when she least expected it. After breakfast, she would clean the house, do the washing, mend clothes, and prepare the midday and evening meals. It was hard work, but honest and satisfying in a way that her lonely struggle to maintain her own homestead had not been. Here, she was part of something larger, and she could see the direct results of her labor in the well-fed men and the orderly household. And every night, Franklin stood guard. She never mentioned it, and neither did he, but she knew. Sometimes she would wake in the dark hours and hear his footsteps, steady and reassuring. Sometimes she would see him from the kitchen window at dusk, checking the locks on the barns, scanning the horizon with that alert, watchful expression. He was protecting her, protecting all of them, but Helena knew it was primarily for her sake. The raiders had not struck the Patterson ranch, which was too large and too well defended. But a woman who had already lost everything once was an easy target if they found her again. 3 weeks after her arrival, Franklin drove her into Colfax in the ranch wagon. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings that housed the general store, a saloon, a bank, a doctor's office, and a church. Helena bought fabric to make 2 new dresses, needles and thread, a hairbrush, and other necessities. Franklin waited patiently, carrying her parcels and introducing her to the townspeople they encountered. "This is Mrs. Graham," he would say. "She is working at the Patterson Ranch now." She noticed that he never mentioned the fire or the raiders unless someone asked directly, and then he kept his answers brief and factual. He was protecting her dignity as much as her safety, and she was grateful for his discretion. At the general store, they encountered Sheriff Warren, a portly man with a badge pinned to his vest and a perpetually harried expression. "Mrs. Graham," he said, tipping his hat, "I heard about what happened to your place. I am sorry we have not caught the men responsible yet. They have been hitting properties all over this part of the county." "Do you have any leads?" Franklin asked, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "A few. There is a gang operating out of the hills, we think. Maybe 6 or 7 men. They hit fast and move on before we can get there. But we will catch them eventually." "Eventually might be too late for the next family they target," Franklin said quietly. "I am doing the best I can with the resources I have," the sheriff snapped, defensive. Then he seemed to collect himself. "Look, Edwards, I know you are frustrated. We all are. But these things take time." On the ride back to the ranch, Helena said, "You do not think he will catch them?" "No," Franklin admitted. "The sheriff means well, but he is in over his head. This territory is too big for one man and a single deputy to cover effectively." He glanced at her. "But you are safe at the ranch. I will make sure of it." "You cannot stand guard every night forever," Helena said softly. "You need to sleep." "I sleep enough," Franklin said, which was not really an answer. That night, Helena could not sleep. She kept thinking about Franklin outside in the cold, walking his endless circuit, and finally she got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. She was pouring it into 2 cups when the back door opened, and Franklin stepped inside, his rifle in hand. "I saw the light," he said. "Is everything all right?" "I brought you coffee," she said, holding out one of the cups. "You should at least be warm while you are out there." He took the cup, their fingers brushing briefly, and she felt a spark of something she had not experienced in a long time. "Thank you," he said. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Helena met his eyes. "You have been protecting me since the day you found me. The least I can do is bring you coffee." Franklin was quiet for a moment, then said, "I do not want you to feel obligated. I am doing this because I want to, not because I expect anything in return." "I know," Helena said, "but I want to do this because I want to as well." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither of them was quite ready to name. Franklin drank his coffee, and Helena sat at the table with her own cup, and they talked in low voices about nothing and everything until the coffee was gone, and Franklin said he should get back to his rounds. "Will you do something for me?" Helena asked as he reached for the door. "If I can. Try to get some real sleep tomorrow. Just a few hours, please." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and wonderful. "I will try." After that, bringing Franklin coffee became part of their nightly routine. Helena would wait until she heard his footsteps, then meet him in the kitchen with a fresh pot. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but always there was that growing awareness between them, a connection that felt inevitable and right. October arrived, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color to the trees along the creek. The ranch work shifted to preparing for winter, and Helena threw herself into canning and preserving food, helping Mr. Patterson's ranch hands slaughter and smoke hogs, and making sure the household was ready for the harsh months ahead. One evening, as she was putting away the supper dishes, Mr. Patterson came into the kitchen. "Mrs. Graham, I want you to know how much I appreciate the work you have been doing. The house has not run this smoothly since Martha passed." "Thank you, sir. I am grateful for the opportunity." Mr. Patterson nodded, then said, "I also want you to know that I have noticed the way Franklin looks at you, and the way you look at him when you think no one is watching." Helena felt her cheeks burn. "I hope that is not a problem." "Not at all. Franklin is the best man I have working here, and you are a fine woman. Martha would have approved." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional territory. "I just wanted you to know that if something were to develop between you two, you would both have my blessing. And if you were to marry, I would give you that parcel of land on the south edge of the ranch, the one with the good water and the old line shack. It could be fixed up into a decent home." Helena stared at him, overwhelmed. "Mr. Patterson, I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it, and maybe give Franklin a little encouragement. The man is clearly smitten, but too much of a gentleman to say anything, while he thinks you might feel obligated because of your circumstances." After he left, Helena sat down heavily, her mind whirling. She had been trying not to let herself think too much about her growing feelings for Franklin, telling herself it was too soon after Jacob's death, that she was just grateful for his protection and confusing gratitude with something deeper. But the truth was that what she felt for Franklin was different from what she had felt for Jacob. Jacob had been a comfortable choice, a practical marriage between two people who respected each other and wanted the same things. What she felt for Franklin was more intense, more consuming, more real. She was still sitting there when Franklin came in for his pre-patrol coffee. He took one look at her face and set down his rifle. "What happened?" "Mr. Patterson offered us land," she blurted out. "If we were to marry. He said he has noticed how we look at each other." Franklin went very still. "And how do you feel about that?" Helena took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I feel like I want to know how you feel first." He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to meet you. I feel like the luckiest man alive that I was riding that boundary line the day your home burned. I feel like I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face danger alone again." His dark eyes searched hers. "But I also know you have been through something terrible, and I do not want you to feel pressured or rushed. If you need time, I will wait. If you can never see me as more than the man who helped you, I will accept that and still stand guard every night, because keeping you safe matters more to me than my own happiness." Tears spilled down Helena's cheeks, but this time they were good tears. "You make me feel safe," she whispered, "but you also make me feel alive again. When I am with you, I do not just think about surviving. I think about living, building something new, having a future worth looking forward to." "Is that a yes?" Franklin asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That is a yes," Helena said, and then his arms were around her, and she was holding him just as tightly, feeling his heart pounding against her cheek. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, until Franklin finally pulled back enough to look at her face. "I should probably court you properly," he said. "Take you on buggy rides and bring you flowers and do this the right way." Helena laughed through her tears. You have been courting me with coffee and night watch. I think that is pretty romantic in its own way. Still, I want to do this right. He stood, pulling her up with him. Helena Graham, may I have permission to court you with the intention of marriage? Yes, Franklin Edwards, you may. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Helena felt something broken inside her begin to heal. This was not just gratitude or convenience, or even just attraction. This was love, real and true, and worth everything she had been through to find it. The next morning at breakfast, Mr. Patterson took one look at their faces and grinned. "About time," was all he said, but the ranch hands noticed and offered their congratulations, teasing Franklin good-naturedly about finally getting up the courage to speak his mind. The courting that followed was unconventional by any standard. Franklin was still working long days on the ranch, and Helena still had her household duties, but they found time for each other in stolen moments. Early morning rides before breakfast, where Franklin showed her the most beautiful spots on the ranch. Evenings spent on the porch after supper, talking about their hopes and dreams. Sunday afternoons at the small church in Colfax, sitting side by side in the worn pews, their hands clasped together. Franklin still stood guard at night, but now Helena joined him sometimes, wrapped in her shawl and carrying coffee, walking the circuit with him while they made plans for their future. They would fix up the line shack, expand it into a proper house. They would run a small herd of their own, while Franklin continued to work for Mr. Patterson. They would build something together, something that could not be taken away by raiders or bad luck or any of the other dangers the West could throw at them. In early November, a month and a half after they had acknowledged their feelings, Franklin asked Helena to marry him properly, going down on one knee in the parlor with Mr. Patterson as a witness. He had bought a simple gold band in town with his savings, and when he slipped it onto her finger, Helena felt like the wealthiest woman in California. They set the wedding for the last Saturday in November, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they had to wait through the winter. Helena sewed herself a new dress from soft blue fabric that Franklin said matched her eyes, and the ranch hands pitched in to help Franklin make improvements to the line shack, turning it from a basic shelter into a cozy home. The night before the wedding, Helena could not sleep. She kept thinking about Jacob, wondering if he would be happy for her, or hurt that she had moved on so quickly. But the truth was that Jacob had been gone for over a year now, and she knew he would have wanted her to find happiness again. He had been a practical man, and he would have understood that survival sometimes meant letting go and starting fresh. Franklin must have sensed her wakefulness, because there was a quiet knock at her door around midnight. "Are you all right?" he called softly. She opened the door to find him standing there in the hallway, still fully dressed. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Not about marrying you. I am absolutely certain about that. But about everything else. About whether I deserve this much happiness after losing so much." "You deserve every good thing," Franklin said firmly. "And tomorrow, when you marry me, you are not just getting a husband. You are getting a partner who will work beside you and protect you and love you for the rest of our lives." "I know," Helena said, "and that is exactly what I want." The wedding was small but perfect. The ceremony took place in the Colfax church with Pastor Williams officiating. Mr. Patterson stood up with Franklin, and Mrs. Chin from the neighboring farm stood with Helena, having become a friend over the past few weeks. The church was full of ranchers and townspeople who had heard their story and wanted to witness the happy ending. When Franklin said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. "I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to protect you and provide for you, to love you and honor you for all the days of my life." Helena's voice shook slightly with emotion as she replied, "I promise to be your partner and your helpmeet, to build a home with you, to love you and support you for all the days of my life." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The small congregation erupted in applause, and they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, ready to face whatever came next together. The reception was held at the Patterson Ranch, with tables laden with food that Helena had spent days preparing with help from the ranch wives. There was fiddle music and dancing, and when Franklin swept her into his arms for the first dance, Helena felt like she was floating. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. They stayed at the party until sunset. Then Franklin lifted her into the wagon and drove them to their new home. The line shack had been transformed with whitewashed walls, glass windows, a real stove, and furniture that Franklin and the ranch hands had built. There was a bed with a quilt that Mrs. Chen had gifted them, a table and chairs, shelves for dishes and books, and a braided rug on the floor. It was small but perfect, their own space to begin their married life. Franklin carried her over the threshold, and Helena laughed with pure joy. I feel like this is a dream, and I am going to wake up back in the ashes of my old cabin. It is real, Franklin assured her, setting her down gently. You are real, I am real, and this life we are building together is real. That night, they came together as husband and wife with a passion and tenderness that left Helena breathless. This was so different from her first marriage, where intimacy had been pleasant but somewhat perfunctory. With Franklin, it felt like a conversation of bodies and souls, an expression of the deep connection they shared. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the quilts, talking softly about everything and nothing, until they finally drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. Helena woke once in the night and found Franklin standing at the window, looking out over the darkened land. Old habits, she realized. Even on his wedding night, his instinct was to stand guard. Come back to bed, she called softly. We are safe here. He turned, and even in the dim moonlight she could see his smile. I know, but I am not sure I will ever break the habit of watching over you. I do not mind, Helena said, as long as you remember that you do not have to do it alone anymore. I am your partner in this, remember? Franklin climbed back into bed and pulled her close. I remember. It is going to take some getting used to, though, having someone to share the burden with. We have the rest of our lives to figure it out, Helena said, and fell back asleep, secure in his arms. The winter that followed was cold but wonderful. Franklin continued to work for Mr. Patterson, while also building up their own small herd with cattle he bought, using his savings and wages. Helena managed their household and helped out at the main ranch house several days a week, earning extra money that they saved carefully. They were building something together, slowly and steadily, and the satisfaction of that work was immense. In January, word came that the sheriff had finally caught the raiders. They had made the mistake of trying to rob the bank in a larger town to the south, and a group of armed citizens had captured them after a brief shootout. 3 of the gang members were dead, and the rest were in jail awaiting trial. The reign of terror that had cost Helena her first home was finally over. How do you feel? Franklin asked her when they heard the news. Helena considered the question carefully. I feel like a chapter has closed. I am glad they were caught, and I am glad they will face justice. But I also feel like I have moved so far beyond that day that it almost feels like it happened to someone else. That woman who stood by the creek watching her home burn feels like a stranger to me now. That is because you are not just surviving anymore, Franklin said. You are thriving. We both are. He was right. Their life together had a richness and fullness that surprised her. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy. Sunday rides into the hills, reading aloud to each other in the evenings by lamplight, making love with increasing confidence and playfulness as they learned each other's bodies and desires, hosting dinners for neighbors, and slowly building a community around themselves. In March, Helena realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she told Franklin. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on a radiant happiness that made her heart swell. A baby, he said, his voice full of wonder. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it? Helena asked, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed children yet, and she realized she had no idea if he even wanted them. Happy? Franklin came around the table and pulled her into his arms. Helena, I am more than happy. I am ecstatic, terrified, but ecstatic. She laughed. That is exactly how I feel. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Franklin became even more protective, if that was possible, insisting that she not overwork herself and taking on extra tasks around their small ranch to spare her the heavy labor. Helena alternated between appreciating his concern and feeling frustrated by his tendency to hover, but she understood it came from love. In early September, almost exactly 1 year after the day her old life had burned to ashes, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Chen and the doctor from Colfax, with Franklin pacing anxiously outside until the baby's first cry rang out. When the doctor finally allowed him in, Franklin approached the bed with such reverence that Helena felt tears spring to her eyes. "Meet your son," she said, cradling the tiny bundle. Franklin reached out with trembling hands and took the baby, holding him with the careful tenderness of a man who understood the preciousness of the life in his arms. "He is perfect," he whispered, "absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob Franklin Edwards, honoring both of the men who had been important in Helena's life. Little Jacob was a content baby, with Franklin's dark hair and Helena's blue eyes, and from the moment of his birth, he was the center of their world. Franklin proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk a fussy baby, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every spare moment playing with his son. Helena would often find the two of them on the porch, Franklin talking to Jacob about the ranch and the cattle and the land, as if the infant could understand every word. "He is too young to understand you," Helena teased one evening. "Maybe," Franklin said, "but it is never too early to start teaching him about the things that matter: family, hard work, loyalty, love." As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, their little ranch grew as well. Franklin's skill with cattle earned him respect among the other ranchers, and they were able to slowly expand their herd and their land. Mr. Patterson sold them additional acreage at a fair price, and they began to build a larger house to replace the converted line shack. The new house rose slowly, built in stages as they could afford materials and time. Franklin did most of the work himself, with help from neighboring ranchers on weekends. Helena watched it take shape beam by beam, wall by wall, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was not just a house. It was a home, built on love and determination and the refusal to let tragedy define their lives. By the time Jacob was 2 years old and running around getting into everything with the unstoppable energy of a toddler, the house was finished. It had a spacious kitchen with a new stove, a parlor with real glass windows, 2 bedrooms, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was the finest house Helena had ever lived in, and every nail in it represented hours of Franklin's labor and their shared dreams. The day they moved in, Franklin carried her over the threshold just as he had on their wedding night, then set her down and called for Jacob, who came running with his arms outstretched. Franklin scooped him up, and the 3 of them stood together in their new home, a family in every sense of the word. "I have been thinking," Franklin said that night after Jacob was tucked into his new bed, "about hiring a couple of ranch hands so I can spend more time here with you and Jacob. The herd is big enough now that I cannot manage it alone, and I do not want to miss watching our son grow up." "That sounds perfect," Helena said, "and it would be good to have help. I have been thinking, too, about expanding the garden and maybe getting some chickens. If we are going to keep growing, we need to be more self-sufficient." "We make a good team," Franklin said, pulling her close. "The best team," Helena agreed. In the spring of 1886, when Jacob was nearly 3, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt different, less overwhelming, and more like a natural continuation of the life they were building. Franklin was just as excited as he had been the first time, but more confident, less afraid. "Boy or girl, it does not matter to me," he said, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "As long as you are both healthy." "I think a girl this time," Helena said. "Jacob needs a little sister to boss him around." She was right. In November, she gave birth to a baby girl they named Sarah Grace Edwards. Where Jacob had been content and easy, Sarah was fierce and demanding from the start, with a set of lungs that could wake the entire ranch. Franklin fell in love with her instantly, this tiny scrap of a person who wrapped him around her little finger within days. Watching him with their children, Helena often thought about how far they had both come. Franklin, who had arrived in California as a lonely drifter with nothing but his skills and his determination, was now a successful rancher with a family who adored him, and she, who had lost everything to fire and violence, had rebuilt her life into something more beautiful and fulfilling than she could have imagined. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children. Jacob learning to ride his first horse at age 4, with Franklin walking beside him, holding the lead rope. Sarah taking her first steps on the porch while Helena clapped and cheered. Jacob starting school at the small schoolhouse in Colfax. Sarah proving to have her father's gift with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse with her gentle touch. When Jacob was 7 and Sarah was 4, Helena gave birth to twins, boys they named Thomas and William. Franklin joked that they were trying to populate their own town, but Helena could see the pride and joy in his eyes every time he looked at their growing family. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. They hired more hands, built a proper bunkhouse, and established themselves as one of the most successful cattle operations in the county. But success never changed Franklin. He still rose before dawn to work alongside his men, still treated everyone with respect, and still walked the perimeter of their property some nights, old habits dying hard. "You do not need to stand guard anymore," Helena told him on one of those nights, finding him outside under the stars. "Those days are long past." "I know," Franklin said, pulling her into his arms. "But I like to take stock sometimes. Look at what we have built. Make sure I am not dreaming." Helena looked around at the ranch, at the house with lamplight glowing in the windows, at the barns and pastures and the land that stretched to the horizon. "If it is a dream, then we are both dreaming it together." "That is the best kind of dream," Franklin said, and kissed her under the starlight. When Jacob turned 10, Franklin began teaching him the business of ranching in earnest. The boy proved to have his father's work ethic and his mother's head for figures, and Franklin often said that his son would run the ranch even better than he did someday. Sarah, at 7, declared that she would be a rancher too, and no amount of gentle suggestion that girls usually did not run cattle operations could dissuade her. Franklin supported her ambitions, teaching her everything he taught Jacob, earning disapproving looks from some of the more traditional ranchers in the area. "Let them disapprove," he told Helena. "Our daughter can do anything she sets her mind to, and I will not be the one to limit her." The twins, Thomas and William, were alike as two peas in a pod and completely inseparable. They had their own language of looks and gestures, and they got into mischief with a creativity that left Helena simultaneously exasperated and impressed. Franklin laughed at their antics, seeing himself in their adventurous spirits. In the summer of 1893, when Helena was 35 and Franklin was 37, they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. It seemed like half the county turned out, testament to the friendships and respect they had built over the years. Mr. Patterson, now in his 70s and mostly retired, gave a toast. "I have known Franklin Edwards since he came to work for me as a young man," he said, "and I knew from the start that he was someone special. But I never imagined he would become like a son to me, or that his family would become my family. When I sent him out that day to check on the fire, I thought he was just doing his job. But he came back with Helena, and that was the day everything changed. They have built something remarkable here, not just a ranch but a legacy. And I am proud to have played a small part in bringing them together." There was applause and more toasts, and when the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Helena and Franklin stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard in the long summer twilight. "Do you ever think about that day?" Helena asked quietly. "The day we met?" "All the time," Franklin admitted. "I think about the woman I found by the creek, who had lost everything but had not lost herself. I think about how brave you were, starting over with nothing but determination. And I think about how lucky I am that I was the one who got to help you." "I was the lucky one," Helena said. "You gave me everything, a home, a family, a reason to believe in happy endings again." "We gave each other everything," Franklin corrected. "That is how partnership works." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, watching Jacob help Sarah teach the twins to skip stones in the creek. "Do you think they understand how lucky they are? To be growing up here, safe and loved, with everything they need?" "Probably not yet," Franklin said. "But they will someday. When they are older and have seen more of the world, they will understand what we built for them, what it cost, and why it matters." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Helena felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of that terrible day when raiders had burned her out were still there, faded but not forgotten. But they were just one part of her story now, not the whole story. The whole story included Franklin riding up out of the smoke with kindness in his eyes and help in his hands. It included late-night conversations over coffee and the gentle way he had courted her with patience and respect. It included their wedding in the small church and the home they had built together. It included 4 children who were growing up strong and confident, knowing they were loved. The whole story was about so much more than loss. It was about resilience and redemption, about second chances and the courage to take them. It was about a cowboy who had guarded her every night after the worst day of her life and had somehow become the best thing that ever happened to her. As they stood together watching their children in the sunset, Franklin took her hand and laced their fingers together. No words were needed. They both understood that this moment, this perfect culmination of years of work and love and determination, was exactly what they had been building toward from the day they met. The years continued their march, bringing changes and challenges as all years do. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, accidents and illnesses that tested them. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense, and what they had built proved strong enough to weather any storm. When Jacob was 16, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emily, who fit into their family as if she had always been there. Franklin and Helena watched their eldest son court his first love with the same serious intensity he brought to everything, and they recognized the echoes of their own story in his careful devotion. Sarah, at 13, showed no interest in romance, much more concerned with convincing her father to let her help with the spring cattle drive. Franklin eventually agreed, making her the first girl in the county to ride with the Cowboys, and she returned sun-browned and happy, full of stories about the adventure. The twins, now 9, had developed a fascination with the mechanical side of ranching, and they spent hours taking apart and reassembling equipment, figuring out how things worked. Franklin encouraged their curiosity, seeing it as a valuable skill for the changing world they would inherit. In 1896, when Franklin was 40 and Helena was 38, they were surprised to discover that Helena was pregnant again. The news brought mixed emotions. They were both older now, and 5 children already kept them busy. But when baby Margaret Rose Edwards arrived healthy and squalling in the winter of 1897, any doubts vanished. The older children doted on their baby sister, and she grew up surrounded by more love and attention than any one child probably needed. Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1898 at the age of 76. His death hit Franklin hard, as the old rancher had been the closest thing to a father he had known since his own father's death. Patterson left them additional land in his will, along with a letter that Franklin read aloud to Helena through his tears. Franklin and Helena, the letter said, "You have been the children I never had, and your family has brought me more joy than I can express. I am proud of everything you have built and everything you have become. Take care of each other and this land, and know that you made an old man's final years the happiest of his life." They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to the grave of his wife Martha, and Franklin made sure to visit the site regularly, keeping his promise to take care of the land Patterson had loved. As the new century dawned, bringing with it automobiles and electricity and all the modern wonders that would gradually change the West, the Edwards Ranch remained a constant. Jacob had married Emily, and they were building a house on the northern section of the property, planning to raise their own family while working the ranch. Sarah, at 17, still had no interest in marriage, but was proving to be one of the best horse trainers in the county, with people coming from miles around for her services. The twins had gone off to school in San Francisco studying engineering, though they promised to return and apply their knowledge to improving ranch operations. And little Margaret, now 3, was growing up fearless and curious, trailing after her father everywhere he went and asking endless questions that he patiently answered. One evening in the summer of 1900, Helena and Franklin sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years. Jacob and Emily were visiting with their baby son, making Franklin and Helena grandparents at 42 and 40. Sarah was in the corral working with a particularly stubborn colt. Margaret was playing in the dirt with her collection of rocks and sticks, narrating an elaborate story to herself. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" Helena asked Franklin. "When I asked why you would help a stranger?" "I said it was the right thing to do," Franklin replied, "and that no one should have to face tragedy alone." "You gave me so much more than help," Helena said. "You gave me hope when I had none left." Franklin turned to face her, his dark eyes still as observant and kind as they had been 18 years ago. "You gave me all those things too. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working and existing, but not really living. You taught me what it means to have something worth protecting, worth building a life around." Helena reached for his hand, the same hand that had offered her help from horseback all those years ago. "I used to think the fire was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but now I understand that it was also the best thing because it brought me to you. I would not trade a single moment of what we have built together, not for anything. Even the hard times? Franklin asked with a slight smile. Especially the hard times, Helena said. They taught us that we could survive anything as long as we had each other. And we did survive. We did more than survive. We thrived. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, their grandchild started to cry from the house, and Emily called for Jacob. Sarah's laughter rang out from the corral as she finally got the colt to accept the saddle. Margaret came running to show them a beetle she had found, her small face glowing with excitement. This was their life, Helena thought. This beautiful, chaotic, perfect life they had built, from nothing but determination and love. It had started with ashes and ended with abundance, and every step of the journey had been worth it. Franklin stood and held out his hand to her, the same gesture he had made on their wedding day when he had asked her to dance. "Shall we?" he asked. Helena took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, understanding without words what he was asking. Together, they would walk the property as the stars came out, checking fences and animals and all the small details that made a ranch run smoothly. He would point out things that needed attention, and she would add them to the mental list she kept. They would stop at the creek where he had first found her and stand there for a moment, honoring the place where their story had begun. And then they would return to the house, to the warm lights and the voices of their family, to the bed they had shared for 18 years and the love that had only grown stronger with time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but they would face it together, just as they had faced every day since Franklin had ridden into her life and offered her hope when she needed it most. As they walked hand in hand through the gathering darkness, Helena felt Franklin's thumb trace gentle circles on her palm, a gesture so familiar and comforting that it felt like coming home. And she realized that was exactly what he had given her. Not just a house or a ranch or a family, though he had given her all of those things. He had given her home, that feeling of belonging and safety and unconditional love that she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. The raiders had burned her out, destroying everything she had worked for and leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and grief in her heart. But a cowboy had helped her start over, had guarded her every night after, and in doing so had become the greatest blessing of her life. Their love story was not the fairy tale kind, with grand gestures and instant passion. It was better than that. It was real and earned, built on mutual respect and shared hardship, and the daily choice to be the partners in building a life worth living. As they reached the creek, Helena paused and looked back toward their home, seeing the lamplight glowing in the windows and the silhouettes of their family moving inside. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Franklin asked, though she could hear in his voice that he understood. "For finding me, for helping me, for loving me, for all of this." She gestured toward the house and the land and the life they had created. "For being the best man I have ever known." Franklin pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms beside the creek where their story had begun, and Helena knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. Not because fate had ordained it, or because there was some grand cosmic plan, but because she and Franklin had chosen each other, had worked for this, had built it together with their own hands and hearts. The stars came out overhead, brilliant and numberless, and somewhere an owl hooted in the darkness. From the house came the sound of Margaret calling for her mama, and Helena smiled against Franklin's chest. Their daughter was probably fighting bedtime again, as she did every night, wanting to squeeze every last moment of awareness out of her days. "We should go back," Helena said, though she made no move to leave the circle of Franklin's arms. "In a minute," he said. "I want to remember this moment, just us, here where it all started, with everything we built waiting for us up the hill." So they stayed a minute more, and then another, storing up the peace and the beauty and the profound gratitude they both felt. Finally, hand in hand, they walked back up the slope toward home, toward the laughter and chaos and love that waited there. That night, after the children were all in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Helena and Franklin lay in their bed, talking in low voices, as they had done thousands of nights before. They talked about Jacob and Emily's baby, about Sarah's plans to expand her horse training business, about the twins' progress in their studies, about Margaret's endless energy and curiosity. "We did all right, didn't we?" Franklin said eventually. "With all of this, with the ranch and the kids and everything?" "We did better than all right," Helena assured him. "We did wonderfully. Look at our children, Franklin. They are kind and hardworking and confident. They know they are loved. They have a home and a heritage and opportunities. We gave them everything we never had, and we did it together." Franklin rolled toward her, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look at her face in the moonlight that filtered through the window. "I love you, Helena Edwards. I loved you from the moment I saw you standing by that creek, refusing to be broken by what had happened to you. And I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." "I love you too," Helena whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me back my life and made it better than I ever imagined it could be." They made love then with the tenderness and familiarity of long marriage, but also with the passion that had never dimmed between them. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same, more hard work and small joys and shared dreams coming true. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and change. Jacob and Emily had 3 more children, giving Franklin and Helena 4 grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. Sarah eventually did marry, at the age of 25, to a veterinarian from Sacramento who shared her love of horses and respected her independent spirit. The twins returned from school with engineering degrees and immediately began modernizing the ranch operations, installing windmills for water and improving the irrigation systems. Margaret grew into a spirited young woman who inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's protective instincts. She went to normal school and became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property so the children of ranch families could get an education without traveling to Colfax. Through it all, Helena and Franklin remained the constants, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces acquiring lines from years of work and laughter and squinting into the sun. But their love never aged. If anything, it deepened with every passing year, every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated together. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party that brought together everyone who had been part of their story. The ranch was packed with people, 3 generations now, all of them connected by the love that Franklin and Helena had started with a conversation over coffee in a farmhouse kitchen so many years ago. "Speech!" someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant until Franklin stood, pulling Helena up beside him. "I am not much of a talker," Franklin began, which made everyone laugh because it was true. "But I want you all to know that everything you see here, everything we built, started with one simple choice, the choice to help someone who needed it. The choice to be kind when the world had been cruel. The choice to believe in the possibility of something better." He looked at Helena, his dark eyes still as full of love as they had been on their wedding day. "My wife lost everything to violence and greed. She could have become bitter. She could have given up. But instead, she chose to start over, to be brave, to build something new. And she let me be part of that building. For 25 years, she has been my partner, my love, my best friend. She made me a better man, a better father, a better human being. And I thank God every day that I was riding that boundary line when her world fell apart, because it gave me the chance to be part of putting it back together." There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and when Helena stood on her toes to kiss him, the applause was thunderous. Then it was her turn to speak, and she looked out at the sea of faces, at the family and friends who had become the fabric of their lives. "My husband is too modest," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her throat. "He says I chose to be brave, but the truth is that I could only be brave because he made me feel safe. He guarded me every night after I lost everything, not just physically, but emotionally. He protected my heart when it was most vulnerable, and he gave me the time and space to heal. And then, when I was ready, he loved me with a devotion and constancy that has never wavered. Everything good in my life started the day Franklin Edwards rode into it, and I am the luckiest woman in the world to be his wife." The party went on late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Franklin danced with Helena first, then with Sarah and Margaret and Emily, then with his granddaughters. Helena danced with Jacob and the twins and several of the old ranch hands who had worked for them for decades. And when the last guest finally departed and they were alone in their house, they collapsed into bed, exhausted but happy. 25 years, Helena mused, snuggling against Franklin's chest. It feels like yesterday, and also like forever. I know what you mean, Franklin said. Sometimes I still see that woman by the creek, so lost and hurting. And then I look at you now, surrounded by everything we built, and I can hardly believe it is the same person. She is still here, Helena said softly. The woman by the creek. She is part of me, part of my story. But she is not all of me anymore. Now I am also the woman who rebuilt, who loved, who raised a family and created a legacy. And I am grateful for both versions of myself, because they are both necessary to understand what we have accomplished. Franklin kissed the top of her head. You are wise, Helena Edwards. I am old, she corrected with a laugh. 50 years old as of last month. When did that happen? You are not old. You are seasoned, Franklin said. Like good whiskey or fine leather. Helena laughed harder. Only you would compare me to whiskey and leather and think it was romantic. It is romantic, Franklin insisted. Whiskey and leather are both valuable things that get better with age, just like you. They talked and laughed until they fell asleep, and in the morning they woke to another day of the life they had built together, another day of work and love and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done something meaningful with their time on Earth. The years rolled on, bringing the challenges of age and the world changing around them. The automobile became commonplace, and electricity came to their part of California. The twins installed electric lights in the main house as a gift for their parents' 30th anniversary, though Franklin grumbled about the expense and Helena secretly missed the soft glow of lamplight. Their grandchildren grew up and started families of their own, making Franklin and Helena great-grandparents. The ranch operations were largely in the hands of the younger generation now, though Franklin still rode out most days, unable to fully retire from the work he loved. Helena had slowed down more, arthritis making household tasks more difficult, but she still managed the kitchen and kept the family records and offered advice when asked. In the spring of 1920, Franklin suffered a heart attack while out riding the boundary line. Jacob found him and got him back to the house, and the doctor came, but they all knew it was serious. Franklin recovered enough to continue his life, but more slowly now, with the understanding that his time was limited. I am not afraid, he told Helena one night as they lay in bed. I have lived a good life, a full life. I have loved you and been loved by you. I have raised children and seen them raise children of their own. I have built something that will last beyond me. A man could not ask for more. You are not allowed to die yet, Helena said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. I am not ready. I will never be ready. Someday you will have to be, Franklin said gently. But not today. I am still here, and we still have time. They made the most of that time, treasuring every moment. Franklin told stories to his great-grandchildren, passing on the family history and the lessons he had learned. He worked with Jacob to make sure the ranch operations would continue smoothly without him. He sat on the porch with Helena for hours, just holding her hand and watching the land they loved. On a warm evening in September of 1922, 40 years almost to the day after he had found Helena by the creek, Franklin Edwards passed away peacefully in his sleep with his wife beside him. He was 64 years old, and he had lived to see his family flourish and his legacy secured. Helena grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had Franklin for 40 years, which was more than many people got, and she knew he would not want her to fall apart. So she mourned him properly, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and then she continued living, because that was what he would have wanted. She lived another 12 years, dying peacefully at the age of 76 in the house they had built together, surrounded by 4 generations of the family they had created. Her last words were, "Tell Franklin I am coming," and there was a smile on her face as she slipped away. They buried her next to Franklin on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were buried. The headstone read, Helena Graham Edwards, 1858-1934, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She rose from the ashes and built a legacy of love. The ranch continued for generations after them, run by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. The story of a woman who lost everything and a cowboy who helped her start over. The story of vigilant protection that turned into deep love. the story of two people who refused to let tragedy define them and instead built something beautiful from the ruins. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the California hills and the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, the great-great-grandchildren of Franklin and Helena Edwards would sometimes claim they could feel the presence of their ancestors, walking the boundary line together one more time, forever guarding the legacy they had built, from love and determination and the courage to start over. The end